Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our second class together this February of 2022 in our February spirituality series here at Temple Sinai, entitled Kabbalah Made Simple: How to Understand Jewish Mysticism and Apply It to Your Life. So that's what we are attempting to do in these three classes together, is to understand Jewish mysticism and to apply it to our lives, and to make meaning of it, and hopefully to enrich our lives by these ancient Jewish teachings and modern ancient Jewish teachings as well, because we're bringing in some modern day Kabbalistic thinkers as well as some ancient ones. So last week's class, we looked at the major symbol system of Kabbalah, which is the Sphirot, these 10 attributes of God, these 10 emanations from God that are also part of human consciousness. So these 10 Sphirot, these 10 attributes are a part of God. They are part of human beings created in God's image. And they're also, I'm going to go ahead and I wonder if folks can mute. Because I'm hearing some background, I wonder if we could stay muted until somebody, until we call on somebody or somebody would like to ask a question. So the Sphirot, these 10 attributes of God are part of God. They're part of human beings created in God's image. They're the underlying structure of reality itself. So one cannot speak about Kabbalah, which is the term for the Jewish mystical tradition, the way that we're using Kabbalah. One cannot really understand the Jewish mystical tradition without understanding the 10 Sphirot. All roads really lead to the Sphirot. And so last class we looked at the 10 Sphirot and described them, and we'll be looking at them again and again and referencing them again and again. Were there any questions for those of you who were in the last class? Were there any questions about the Sphirot in thinking about it over this past week, that you had a question, something did not make sense, or something that we could help clarify? Okay, so pretty straightforward, or it's not something you want to bring up? I am going to go ahead and share my screen right now, and I'll put up the Spherotic Chart, or the Spherotic Tree as it's sometimes called. I'm going to share that just so I can sort of reference it. And I'm actually, excuse me. Let me stop that share for a second. Let me try it again. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so hopefully, there we go. So can everybody see that? Right, this is the image that we've been looking at. And in looking at these 10 attributes of God and part of the human personality, God's personality, the structure of the universe itself, we've got various sort of collections of the Sphirot that we can think about. We can think about this upper area when we look at some of the descriptions, Keter, understanding that to be will, and Chokhmah being wisdom, and Bina being understanding. These are sort of mental, intellectual attributes. We're talking about the human being now, right? To have a sense of will, to live with wisdom, to live with understanding. These are sort of mental, cognitive attributes. And then when we start talking about love, chesed, and din, or power, and compassion here at Tiferet, and Netzach, we had talked about one way to understand Netzach is sort of a desire to transform the world, and Hod, an acceptance or a thankfulness of the world. We've got some emotional attributes as well. So we've got some cognitive attributes here. We've got some emotional attributes. And when we get down to Shekhinah, the final Sphira, and all the Sphirot, all these attributes funnel and flow into the final Sphira of Shekhinah, which means presence. Another name for that is, description of that is the earth itself. So the physical world. represented in Shekhinah. So we've got in the Sphirot, we've got the mental, we've got the emotional, we've got the physical, and we also have the spiritual. I suppose we could say too that above the Sphirot, the Ein Sof, the name for God that the Kabbalists use, the ultimate reality of God without end, Ein Sof, literally without end. We're certainly talking about the spiritual. And I think with all the Sphirot, we're also talking about spiritual aspects to us as well. So I think it's helpful for us to think and remember too, that when we're looking at this, we're also looking at layers of human personality that contain all sort of aspects of our being, the mental, the emotional, the physical, as well as the spiritual. And we looked also at sort of masculine and feminine components to the Spherotic system. One of the amazing things about the Spherotic system is that it sort of has this yin yang, it has this balance, these complements, these polarities of masculine and feminine, and various dialectic polarity of thesis and antithesis that is synthesized in the middle with these middle Sphirot. So we've got sort of the right side, the left side, masculine and feminine. Usually the right side here is considered masculine, the left side is considered feminine, and then the middle is the balance of those two polarities. Now, I wanted to talk about the masculine and feminine aspect because it's really a radical idea in the Kabbalistic system too. Usually Judaism talks about, when we think of God, and at least in the Bible, and even somewhat in the Talmud, sort of masculine attributes come to mind, and for various reasons, certainly written by men a long time ago. But what was neat about the Kabbalistic system is the feminine really was brought in a strong way. In Shekhinah, sort of the feminine aspect of God that's talked about in the Talmud really takes on a huge attribute and persona in the Kabbalistic system. Shekhinah is a full-fledged female aspect of God. And it's a very powerful idea. And to show how important in the Kabbalistic system this balancing of male and female is, having just the full range of not only human experience, but also these attributes in the world itself, how having that full range is so important in the Kabbalistic system. It's in balancing these polarities that may exist within each of us. So to give you an example of that, I'm going to share with you a famous quote from the Zohar. The Zohar we mentioned, which literally means a radiance or brightness or splendor. The Zohar is this 13th century Kabbalistic work of over 1,000 pages, written in Spain. It is the masterwork, the masterpiece of Jewish mysticism, of Kabbalah. It's the Bible of Jewish mysticism, and it's studied like amongst Jewish mystics, like the Bible is studied, like the Talmud is studied, very closely, very in depth with commentary. And so here is a passage from the Zohar, translated into English, of course. The Zohar was written in Aramaic, the language of the Talmud. And this is going to really underscore how important the male and the female is within God and within us and within the world. These two complementary polarities, the yin and yang, in a sense. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you the quote from the book of Genesis, because the Zohar is a commentary on the Torah. The Zohar is a mystical commentary on the Torah and biblical characters. So it's going to begin now with a quote from Torah, and then you're going to see this mystical understanding of what the Torah text means to say from a Kabbalistic standpoint. So I'll read from the Torah, and then I'd like to invite somebody to read the Zohar in English translation, again by Daniel Matt, one of the major American scholars of Zohar in this past 50 years. So Genesis 5, chapter 5, verses 1 and 2 says, on the day that God created Adam, on the day, sometimes it says in an older translation, on the day that God created man. If you look at a new translation, on the day that God created humanity, but literally on the Hebrew says, on the day that God created Adam, in the likeness of God, God created him. Male and female, God created them. Notice the change into the plural. Male and female, God created them. God blessed them and called their name Adam on the day they were created. So it is now in the plural. In the Torah, this is the Torah's language. This is in the Hebrew. It's in the plural. So now we're going to get the Kabbalistic understanding of this text on the creation of the first human beings. Would somebody like to volunteer to read? Maggie, all right. Maggie, if you will read and I'll keep it on the screen. Yeah, so Maggie, if you'll unmute there, please. Yes, Maggie's unmuting. Are you able to unmute, Maggie?
This way.
There we go.
Rabbi Shimon said, supernal mysteries are revealed in these two verses. Male and female, God created them, making known the glory on high, mystery of faith. Out of this mystery, Adam was created. Male and female, God created them. From here we learn any image not embracing male and female is not a supernal, true image. Come and see, the Blessed Holy One does not place God's abode anywhere male and female are not found together. Blessings are found only where male and female are found, as it is written, God blessed them and called their name Adam on the day they were created. It is not written, God blessed him and called his name Adam. A human being is only called Adam when male and female are as one.
Thank you, Maggie. And by the way, this is also Talmudic in a sense. As we'd mentioned, the Zohar is very much in keeping with Torah and Talmudic thought, but is it a deepening of it? It is an extension of it. It is more creative interpretations built upon it. But the foundation for the Zohar really is Torah and Talmud. And then they bring in some, creative ideas and in some cases radical ideas. But this idea that God created the first human being, Adam, male and female, is in the Talmud. The first human being is considered an androgynous being in the Talmud. And the example of that, so that the first human being was both male and female, and the Talmud suggests that they were sort of back to back. So one side was male, and then back to that was the female side. And then when it says in the second chapter of the Torah that God, created Eve from Adam's rib, the Talmud understands that to be God didn't really take from the rib, but just split that androgynous being, in half. But the original Adam, the original human being, according to the Talmud and the Zohar, building upon that, was this androgynous being that was male and female. And that androgyny is represented in the Spherot, male and female. Father and mother, Chokhmah being the primal father, Bina being the primal mother, Teferet, their creation, being male, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the traditional Talmudic name for God, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, God. So one element of God being male, and then Shekhinah being this female indwelling presence of God, and that Teferet and Shekhinah are bride and groom. So you've got father, mother, bride, groom, children. You've got all of these genders represented in God, God's self. And it's a pretty radical idea, at least in Judaism, because it was this very patriarchal, sort of male-centered approach. But in Kabbalah, really Shekhinah, a lot of Kabbalah is about Shekhinah, the female presence of God. Bina, the mother of all. And Shekhinah being the place where, when Tiferet and Shekhinah come together as bride and groom, that's where our human soul is created, through the union of Tiferet and Shekhinah. That is the birthplace of the human soul. That is the birthplace of everything physical in the world. So everything, the Zohar says, everything comes through Shekhinah. We can only know about the other Sphirot by coming through Shekhinah. Shekhinah is the gateway to understanding God, to understanding this world, and to understanding ourselves. So very neat idea, sort of the return of the feminine within Judaism through Kabbalah. Any comments or questions about that Zohar piece that we just read, or this idea that a human being, must contain both elements? Any thoughts about that? Okay, we'll go on. I saw, Paul, I saw your note that you've been reading about Moses of Leon, who is considered to be the author of the Zohar, 13th century Spain. Paul, I'm curious to know, what have you been reading about?
No, I'm reading, there's a cute story in this book about Andalusia, about how he was on a journey, and he didn't come home. He passed away on the way home, and a rich man in Castile offered to have his son marry his daughter if they would give him a copy of the Zohar.
Uh-huh.
And they talk about that. We know that area in Spain was a hotbed of revival of Greek philosophy, and there was great discussions among the Greeks and among the Christians and the Jews and the Arabs. And it was a great area of learning and ferment. And then, as you said last time, things were turning sour, and people were looking for ways out. But it said it's written in Aramaic, but there's evidence of some knowledge of Castilian Spanish, and there's some Arabic phrases, and there's some Hebrew in there too. But he tried to make it look like it was written 200 AD, and he just happened to find it. So I guess that was a traditional thing in religious writing, is to always say it wasn't me, it was some great scholar who we all hold in high esteem. We've all done that from time to time.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're trying to find authority for accepting these teachings and these ideas. If Moses de Leon say, "Hey, I thought of it," well, who are you? But if you say Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the famous disciple of Rabbi Akiva, who was in the cave with his son during the Roman period for 12 or 13 years and studied Jewish, mystical thought, then you've got a pedigree, right? Then you've got a pedigree that you. I think it's
interesting. Of all things that were written, this caught on. I mean, this must have struck a chord in people's hearts or minds.
Yeah.
To achieve the position that it achieved.
Well, you're right, and people could write a PhD on why did these ideas strike a chord at that time with the Jewish people. It would be fascinating to explore that. But there are some things that we can resonate with. This again, this idea that the importance of male and female and being a procreative force, not only in the physical world, in biology and in procreation, but then taking that natural element that we know from reality is so powerful, male and female coming together to reproduce, that there's a spiritual element to that as well. And again, when we look at Kabbalah, you know, we're talking about a deepening of our consciousness, which was expressed. I think, Jill, you might have expressed that when we think of Jewish mysticism, we're looking at a sort of a deepening of consciousness, a deepening of awareness. And so it's a deepening of this recognition of these polarities in the physical world, and through those polarities coming together and in balance and in harmony, being productive and creating the natural world. So yeah. Well, and I want to now share with you something, you know, we'll continue to talk about the Sphirot, but if you continue to look at your handout, let's move from Spain to Sfat Israel, and just 2 centuries later, 16th century Sfat, where this sort of these Jewish mystics gathered in Sfat, and there was just again this blossoming of Kabbalistic Jewish mystical thought and teaching that we're still experiencing today. That Sfat mysticism during our Shabbat worship, 500 plus years later, which we'll talk about in our next class a little bit. But if you turn in the handout to page 4, you will see one of my favorite quotes about God and about the world. And it's related to the Sphirot, of course, as well. The Sphirot are always involved, whether they're talked about directly, but they're always involved indirectly. This is from Moses Cordovero, one of my favorite Kabbalists. He wrote a number of books. He was very prolific, and a lot of his writing is very understandable. And this is a quote found in Danny Matt's book, The Essential Kabbalah, Moses Cordovero of the 16th century. Again, I'm going to share my screen and invite somebody to read what Moses Cordovero has to say about God and the world. So, who would like to read Non-Duality?
I can do it.
I'm sorry, who offered? Mike?
Oh, me, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Hey, Mike's divine. How appropriate.
You know, every time you have these things about divine, it just has it
calls to you.
Resonates with me. What can I say?
I love it.
Okay. All right. The essence of divinity is found in every single thing. Nothing but it exists. Since it causes everything to be, no thing can live by anything else. It enlivens them. Its existence exists in each existent. Not sure what that means. Do not attribute duality to God. Let God be solely God. If you suppose that Ein Sof emanates until a certain point, and that from that point on it is outside of it, you have dualized. Realize, rather, that Ein Sof exists in each existent. Do not say, this is a stone and not God. Rather, all existence is God, and the stone is a thing pervaded by divinity.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, that first paragraph I realize is a little bit not so clear, but I think really the second paragraph and the last few lines are really what's at the heart here. Don't attribute duality to God. If you suppose that Ein Sof, the infinite one, emanates, and again, the Sphirot are sort of these emanations of God. If you suppose that the infinite God emanates until a certain point, and then there's stuff outside of God, you've dualized. Realize that Ein Sof, the infinite one, exists in everything that exists in this universe. God exists in everything in this universe. Don't say this is a stone and not God. Rather, all existence is God. The stone is a thing pervaded by divinity. Now, it's one thing to say that God created the world, which Judaism says in the Torah. It's another thing to say, as the Kabbalists are asserting, that God is in everything in the physical world. God is in everything. Everything is pervaded by God. And they will take it one step further, some Kabbalists, and say everything is God. Everything is God. Everything in a stone is God. A plant is God. A dog is God. Human beings are God. A mountain is God. The soil, the earth is God. Now, this is where they're really taking it now to a deep level, and they are adding an understanding of God that they're taking it to a deeper level than the Torah or even the Talmud might take it. When we say the Shema, when we say that God is one, some Kabbalists, maybe not all, but Moses Cordovero would say, when we say the Shema, that God is one, we're also saying everything is one. And everything is God. It's all one and it's all God. Not just that, there's that God is singular and there's only one God and God created everything. No, everything that God created is God.
No.
And is in God. Now, there's a term for this. The term is called Pan-Antheism. I'm going to put it in the chat box. Pan-Antheism. You may have heard of pantheism. Pantheism is the idea that pan means all and theism means God. So pantheism means all is God, but what Moses Cordovero is getting at too, and what the Kabbalists are getting at, Pan-Antheism, all is in God. All is in God. So we often think in this vertical way in Judaism, right? God's in the sky, God's in the heavens, God's above us, God's transcendent, above us, separate. Pan-Antheism is that we are in God. And I'll share my screen again to show you what this looks like graphically. Give me a sec. Aha. Let me know if you can see this. Can you see that? So traditional theism, here's the universe, God created it, God's above it, God's transcendent, God's outside of it. Pan-Antheism, notice how it changes. The universe is within God. Now, it's not pantheism, because pantheism would be God and universe are like the same circle. Because all is in God means that we are in God, but God does transcend us. So when we talk about God's imminence, remember, Shekhinah means imminent, indwelling presence. Shekhinah is the best representation in the Sphirot for God, pervading the universe, to God to be present in the rock and in the soil and the plant and the dog and us and everything. That's Shekhinah. But the idea is that God also transcends the physical world. So it's transcendence and immanence together. Let's stop for a second. I want to stop the share and I want to see if this makes sense to you, or if you have questions about what Moses Cordovero is saying and what this pan-entheistic Jewish mystical idea is saying as well, that all is in God. Any questions about that or comments about that? Yes, Cindy, and you guys will need to unmute. So Jerry, I don't know if you need to stand up to unmute. Or let me see if I can, I'm sorry, can I do that for you? Oh, I'll ask you to unmute, yeah. Oh, there we go. We can hear you.
You're on. The definition of transcend.
Oh, the definition of transcendent, to transcend. To transcend means to be above, right? To transcend, to be over, to be above, to maybe to be sort of, outside, but with this sense of vertical sense of being above, to be beyond, to be
Yes.
beyond. So another way to see this is that, yes, of course, God is beyond. The Ein Sof, the Infinite One, is beyond, but is also within as well as beyond.
Thank you.
Yes. By the way, you can think of a Jewish star as I like to think of a Jewish star as representing both transcendence and eminence. And forgive me, I don't have a star I can put up right now. But the triangle pointing upward, going upward, with the point going upward as if pointing up to the sky, continuing to flow above. And then you've got the other triangle coming down, and the point is now downward. So the upper point of the triangle is sort of a transcendent image. The downward triangle is a sense of flowing in imminence. So you can think of a Jewish star as combining and linking, interlocking a sense of transcendence and imminence. Yeah, Ruth? Oh, you're muted there, Ruth. And Jerry and Cindy, could I ask you guys if you could? I'm sorry to make you stand up again. No, I will mute. I'll mute Jerry, Cindy. I'll mute you if you just need to unmute if you like to share again. Yeah, Ruth.
And how does evil fit in? All the evil in the world.
Yes, thank you. And it looks like Paul and Maggie had mentioned that too in the chat box. So you will recall that, nothing in the physical world is outside of God, according to this philosophical position, the spiritual position. So where does evil come from? Evil comes from this imbalance. Remember, if you look at the Spherotic Chart again, you've got God's love, you've got chesed. On one side, you've got din, judgment, givurah, power on the other side. If there is too much givurah, if there is too much judgment within God or within us, too much power and abuse of power that's overpowering love, that is where evil resides. Too much judgment, too much power, too much anger, not balanced by love. So the Kabbalists would say that can occur in the Godhead, within God, God's own personality, and also in the human being, with us being miniature versions of God, B'Tselem Elohim, in God's image. So we create evil through our anger, through our judgment, through our abuse of power, and in some ways, God. If there's evil in the world, God is out of balance. God is out of balance and needs to be restored to harmony.
Then you have to ask the question, how can something imperfect emerge from something that's perfect?
There you go, Paul. That's the great question. How can something imperfect occur from something perfect? And this is how, when you combine Ein Sof, the Infinite One, and then this Sphirot, which are sort of not Ein Sof, but Ein Sof creates, you've got this sense that, I think Maimonides said it best, and Paul, you'll appreciate Maimonides as a physician, as a doctor. Maimonides was not a Kabbalist by any stretch of the imagination, but the Kabbalists did draw from Maimonides' thinking in the 12th century. And Maimonides had an understanding of why there's evil in the world or why there's suffering, and that is every physical body in this world that we know of is prone to decay and is prone to death and illness and sickness. Nothing in the physical world is perfect. God, the Infinite One, is perfect. But in a physical manifestation in the physical world, nothing is perfect.
The way I remember it is, God said when God bound our spirits to imperfect matter, he made us subject to all the feelings of matter, but God created matter also.
God created matter. So here's the thing. God wants to create a world. God has a will to create a world. But maybe God recognizes this world will not be perfect. Physical beings by their nature cannot be perfect. They're going to be prone to change and to death and to decay. And God, didn't design a world where there is no death, where there is no decay, where there is no imperfection. If we're to have, another way to look at it is, if we're to have free choice, if we're not to be just God's robots, God's little toys, but if we are to exert our own freedom and sense of will and sense of choice, we have the choice to make wrong decisions and hurtful decisions. And so it's sort of built into the fabric of free will, the fabric of a world where we do have power, we do have choice, we do have our own will, and we're going to make some mistakes along the way. But mistakes are built into the fabric of a physical world. So we don't choose earthquakes, we don't choose tsunamis, we don't choose birth defects. That's not our choice, but it is part of the natural world. So if we want to leave it at God's doorstep, I think we have every right to. God, why did you create a world where there are birth defects, where there are earthquakes, where there are tsunamis? Why is there that level of evil in this world? I don't know that we have a good answer for it, but the Kabbalists would say that's reality. That's the reality we're living in, that God created, that God's a part of. We need to accept it on some level. So don't all, Marie is asking, don't all imperfections give us opportunities to learn? Yeah, absolutely. Isn't that where growth takes place? Through the brokenness, through the needing to transform back to Netzach, one of God's attributes, through the desire to transform something. If it was perfect, there'd be nothing to transform. But we have the ability to transform the world. And is that not an exercise of our goodness, an exercise of our power, an exercise of our love, an exercise of our growth as human beings to learn? Absolutely. Right. Yeah. Thank you, Marie. Adam and Eve were the first ones to be imperfect, right? Yes, Jill. Adam and Eve. There was a thought that if they didn't taste that fruit from the tree, we could have achieved perfection. But, and again, there's a Christian idea, in some ways, that, because of Adam and Eve's sin of eating of the tree, and again, and that did bring suffering into the world, right? It says afterwards in the Torah, because you did this, God says, Eve, you're going to experience birth pangs. You are going to deliver children in pain. Adam, you're going to have to work the land by the sweat of your brow. I do believe when the Torah mentions that Adam and Eve ate from that tree in that first act of disobedience, that explains why there is suffering in this world. We want to blame Adam and Eve. I mean, that Judaism, we say we're all responsible for our own behavior, right? So we're not going to lay too much blame at their doorstep, but the Kabbalists do sort of approach this sort of Christian idea of original sin. If only they didn't eat from that tree, everything would be gold and everything would be paradise. Everything would be wonderful, as close to perfection as we can. They messed up, and we're all suffering the consequences. Yeah. And yeah, so evil resides within God when God is out of balance. Evil resides within us when we're out of balance. It is a natural part of the physical world, but we can transform it as best we can. Let's see, and improve. Philip said, Pan-Antheism, Mike, Pan-Antheism must have been very radical when first introduced. Were those studying Kabbalah persecuted or ostracized? Not so much, because again, they were, at least from the Jewish world, because they were very much grounded in Talmud and Torah. And again, their answer to Adam and Eve's sin was do the mitzvot. if you do the mitzvot, you will redeem this broken world. You will be doing tikkun olam. So because they were so grounded in Torah, Talmud, and mitzvot, and the mitzvot are the pathways, the mitzvot are the ways to get God back into balance and to get us back in balance, they were on very solid Jewish ground. Now, Pan-Antheism is expressed in Hinduism. It is expressed in other spiritual traditions. Judaism didn't create the idea, but the Kabbalists, maybe they got it from outside, but they clearly were drawn to this idea. They were really so enamored, I'm generalizing now, so enamored of God's imminence that, you know, it just was a natural fit. If you're going to say that God's in the rock, if you're going to say that God's in everything on this earth, but God is above it too, but that's not all God is, because I think it would be heretical to say in some ways that's all God is God equals the world. You know, most Kabbalists would not say that. Some do. But there's this element of transcendence that there's so much a part of Judaism that you need to include that with God's imminence. So I don't know. What do y'all think of Pan-Antheism? You know, that we're in God, that everything is pervaded by divinity, as Moses Cordovero said. Do you agree with that? Or, I mean, I want you to feel free to agree, disagree, or say this is interesting or not interesting.
It seems like in much of Judaism, God is separate from his creation. We often talk about the throne of God or aspiring to God as if he were something external.
Yes. You're right. We usually think of that. Art Green in his book, Ehiyah, a wonderful way to think about it, and it's very much a panentheistic way to think about it. I'm trying to find his quote. Oh, God and world. This is what Art Green says. God and world are deep structure and surface of the same reality. So God is deep structure and surface is the physical world. God and world are deep structure and surface of the same reality. Another way to think about it is the ocean and the waves, right? The ocean is very deep. The waves are right on the top. And we can, in some ways, sometimes God is referred to as God is the ocean and we're the waves. We're a manifestation of God. And God is underlying us, and the ocean is not separate from, the waves are not separate from the deep or from the water. The waves are not separate. So again, this is a different, it's not a vertical way. It's not a separation. It is very much an organic, again, these organic images that you find in Kabbalah. Water, light, male, female, sun, moon, earth, sky, all of these natural images that are part of the Bible really come back with a strong force in Kabbalah. And we can learn a lot. Kabbalah would say we can learn a lot from these natural images. So deep surface, that's God and that's us. That's God and the world. Allison, you'd made a comment in the chat box that your dad agreed with. I think we have imperfections and sadness in this world so that we can be thankful when good things happen in life. If we were never sad, we would never feel true happiness. Yes. Well said, Allison. It's the yin and the yang. It is the sense of the polarities, the light and the dark. How can we appreciate light unless we've experienced darkness? How can we appreciate heat if we haven't experienced cold? How can we experience the joy and be grateful for healing if we haven't experienced sickness and illness? It seems to be the way of the world, that there are these dualities, there are these polarities, there are these complementary things, and we need both. There can be no up with no down. You know, they belong together. There can be no left with no right. We need these polarities in the world, but underlying what looks like a separation, a distinction, a duality, is a unity. It's all connected. And this is, the other great, I think teaching of Kabbalah is that with this perceived separation, this perceived duality, this perceived diversity, and it's all true, but underlying all of that duality and diversity and polarity is a unity. And God is part of that unity. God connects us to everything else. Within God's unity, within the Shema, that God is one. So we can't imagine a world without this dialectic of light, dark, up, down, black, white, left, right, male, female. We don't know a world without that. So now let's bring God into all of that and have God harmonize it, bring it together. I want to share with you another great image that's huge in Kabbalah, and it's a form of meditation, and we're going to talk about it in the last class. So I'm going to go back and share the screen. And you may have seen this under the non-duality quote. So this is God, what you're looking at here in the Hebrew, the Yud He Vav He, right? This is God's holiest name in Judaism. It's so holy, we don't even pronounce it. It was only said one time a year when the temple stood in Jerusalem. It was said by the high priest, the holiest person in the temple, the holiest place, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day. According to our tradition, it's the only time that God's name was pronounced. Instead, we say Adonai, literally my Lord. But the Kabbalists take this holiest name of God, and in it, they attach it to the Sphirot, and they're going to bring us to this sense of this unity, that God is the ultimate unity and that all is one and all is within God. So Yud He Vav He, one way to understand these four letters is from the song that we sing, Adon Olam. I've got Adon Olam right here. Could have Maggie sing it for us. But in the Jewish prayer, in the song that we say, in Adon Olam, it says in the second stanza, talking about God, V'hu haya, v'hu hoveh, v'hu yehyeh, b'tifara. Haya was, hoveh is, yehyeh will be. All of those verb forms of being, of to be, are found in these four letters, Yud He Vav He. Haya, here's the He, here's the Yud, here's the He. Hoveh, here is the He, and here is the Vav, and here is the He. And then Yehyeh, here is the Yud, here is the He, here another Yud, and another He. So God's holiest name literally has within it all the verb forms, all the tenses of being, to be. One way to understand this is that God is the source of all being. Another way to understand this from the Kabbalistic perspective is that God is being itself. Again, this pan-antheistic notion, God is being itself. Any form of existence contains God within it. And the Kabbalists would say that is reflected in God's holiest name. Another way, if we move these letters around, this holy name for God is sometimes called a tetragrammaton. Has anybody heard that expression? Tetragrammaton, I think, is Greek for four letters. So sometimes this is referred to as the four-lettered name of God, tetragrammaton. In Judaism, it's called Havaya. Havaya can be pronounced, and Havaya is transposing the letters. Ha, He, Va, there's the V, the Vav. Havaya, there's the Yud, there's the He. Havaya means existence. So God's holiest name, sometimes called in the Kabbalah and in Jewish mystical tradition, Havaya, it means existence. God is existence. and God transcends existence, but God is within is existence. Now, this is a traditional Kabbalistic way to stack the letters. Take a look at this. There's the Yud vertical. There's the Hey, there's the Vav and the Hey. What does that look like? What does that look like to you? I'm trying to look around the Zoom room, and I'll stop the share for a second. Did somebody put in the chat box? Oh, it looks like a candle. Okay.
Maybe
A
eternal
ladder.
flame. The eternal flame, maybe.
Okay, nice. I like it. A ladder, the eternal flame, a candle. Let me share the screen again and see if this makes sense too. Can you see my screen? How about the Yud looking like a head? How about the Hey looking like arms and shoulders? How about the Vav looking like a torso? And how about the bottom Hey looking like legs? Now, I didn't come up with that. If you take a look at Art Green's description of the Sphirot here, you can see that when he talks about the higher Sphirot, the Yud is in Chokhmah, the Hey is in Bina. All 4 through 9 here, these 6 middle Sphirot are the Vav. He puts a W. It used to be the Vav was pronounced not V, but W. So there's the Yud is in Chokhmah, the Hey is in Bina, the Vav is in the 6 Sphirot that they create together, and they all lead to Shekhinah, the final Hey. So to the Kabbalists, God's name also represents the Sphirot, all 10 Sphirot. I'm sorry, when I say all 10, the Keter is sometimes seen as an Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And remember, Chokhmah is sometimes referred to as like the point of creation, like the Big Bang, a point where it has all the potential. A Yud is like the smallest Hebrew letter. So that's why it's starting with the Yud and Chokhmah, the point of creation, the point of, these emanations of God, a single point that has all potential in it, that then is placed into Bina, the divine womb, to create everything. So when you think of God's name, which occurs thousands of times, I just did a search in a database I have, and I just, typed in the name Lord, which is how we translate it, right? My Lord. In the Tanakh, 7,000 times. God's holiest name occurs, I think, at least 6,000, maybe even 7,000 times. And in God's name, the Kabbalists see God is not only the source of all existence, but God is existence itself, as well as transcending existence. All right, let me stop the share. Any thoughts about that? Yeah, Maria's seen a person there. Sometimes the Spherotic tree is also called Adam Kadmon, the first initial atom. So this is Adam before the atom, the physical atom. This was sort of the blueprint for Adam. The Sphirot, or sort of in a divine, sort of in Adam's body, and so that's also why the Yud Hey Vav Hey is sometimes referred to as, or the Spherotic tree is also referred to as Adam Kadmon, the first atom, the initial, the spiritual atom before the physical atom. Some of this is like heady stuff and really esoteric, and it's like, what does that mean? So I think it's okay to, like, when we talk about it with not full understanding, but I want to sort of give you, to me, the foundational principles of Kabbalah. So if you say, well, we studied Kabbalah, did you talk about the Sphirot? Yes. If you said we didn't talk about the Sphirot, well, wait, you didn't talk about Kabbalah. Did you mention Adam Kadmon? No, we didn't. Well, what are you talking about then? Did you mention, God's holy name, the Havaya? Yeah, we're talking about that. And The other thing that I think it's important for us to talk about is that you'll see in Kabbalistic thought is called four worlds. So we've got mapped, the Yud He Vav He are mapped onto the Sphirot. We saw that with Art Green, but I had mentioned before and alluded to, there are also sort of four levels of being that are also mapped onto the Sphirot, and it's sometimes called the four worlds. And that again is the spiritual, the mental, the cognitive, the emotional, and the physical, and that's also is a big part of Kabbalistic thinking, that those they're like four parallel levels of reality: the spiritual, the physical, the mental, the emotional, at least for human beings. And again, those all sort of need to be balanced in alignment. If those are out of balance and we focus too much on the spiritual, not enough on the physical, we're out of balance. If we focus too much on the physical, not the spiritual, we're out of balance. If we focus too much on the cognitive and not the emotional, we're out of balance. And you can see how all those directions work. So I want to share with you, I'll share with you I didn't find a way to sort of include in the packet, but let me give you a link, and you'll see a beautiful version of this four worlds of Jewish mysticism. I'm going to give you the website in just a second, and I'm going to show it to you on the screen. So if you click on that, you've got the link and you can save it, but I'll also share my screen so you can see it. So there's a branch of Judaism called the Jewish Renewal movement. You may have heard of the Jewish Renewal movement, sort of like a fourth or fifth stream of Judaism, along with Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist. I guess that makes it the fifth stream. And this is sort of from the 1960s and 1970s, where it's sort of based on Chabad, and Chabad's very Kabbalistic, and it was based on Eastern religion and sort of the 60s movement and the sort of embrace of Eastern mysticism in the 60s in America. So Jewish Renewal came out of that world, and they sometimes refer to, and by the way, their major organizing body is called Aleph, again, the letter Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal. And they talk about four worlds Judaism, and they do a beautiful version of talking about this. And again, the terms here are in the Hebrew: Asiyah, Yitzirah, Bria, and Atzilut. These all map onto the Sphirot, and they're also the way that Aleph does it, and a lot of modern Jewish mystical approaches take. They do like earth, fire, air, water, the four seasons. Again, if we look at the first one, or going from bottom up, going from Shekhinah up, the earth, the physical world, that's the physical, and then one layer up, Yitzirah, which means formation, that's water, and that's represented by our feelings. Bria is a higher level, air, more cognitive, intellectual. And then Atzilut, the highest level, which is just emanation, spirituality. When we talk about the Tu B'Shvat Seder, we're eating foods representing the three lower worlds. Atzilut, the highest world, is not represented by food. It's inedible. It's sometimes represented by a pine cone or smelling something. You can't ingest it. It's beyond that. But certainly when we talk about the three types of foods we can eat for Tu B'Shvat Seder, of fruits with shells, fruits with pits, entirely edible, those are Kabbalistic representations. And the Tu B'Shvat Seder came out of the Kabbalists of Sfat in the 1500s. Those foods represent these three worlds, these four worlds. So again, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about these four worlds if we're talking about Kabbalah. And they map onto the Sphirot. They map onto that. So, all right. So I feel like I've been talking a lot and sharing a lot, and you all have been great too. Let's have a discussion with some things that we talked about. Is there anything that's landing well for you that resonates with you? I'll give you a second to think about it. Oh, Allison, please. I see your hand, Allison.
I really liked that you shared about God's name, that he was, is, and will be everything. I don't know. I thought that was really powerful to me.
Yeah, that God was, is, and will be. So Allison, I guess too, we've been talking about, if we sort of think of God as everything in the physical universe is within God, that's space. But was, is, and will be is also time, right? So when we think of infinity, we sometimes may think of infinite space, but also we can think of infinity with infinite time, past, present, and future all together. So yeah, it is a powerful idea. We think of Ein Sof without end, time without end, space without end. It's and again, as Moses Cordovero said, Ein Sof is attached to all this. Don't think that Ein Sof is separate from these 10 Spherot and these emanations. It's all linked together. The infinite is in the finite.
So because God is eternal, so in a way, he doesn't experience time, right?
Well, that's a great way to think about it. Or how about this? God experiences time differently than we do. I once had a literature teacher of all people explain this to me. How can we have free will if God is all knowing? If God knows what we're going to do, how can we have free will? And I had a literature teacher, Keith Welsh in St. Louis. I think he came from a religious background. He said, well, maybe God doesn't see time the way that we do. Because God sees maybe time happening at all levels, when we're making choices, it's like we're going this way and God's going that way. So God is seeing it as it happens, but God isn't making us choose. We still, does that make sense? We still have free will because God can see time this way. Does that make sense?
So God is everywhere all at once. Like there's no such thing. Like I guess what you're saying, like there's no such thing as time for God. Like
yeah,
he can see everything.
There's no such thing. Yeah, if we think of time as yes, well, I think a Kabbalist would say this: God can certainly understand time the way that we can. We're not smarter than God, so we understand time in a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a past, present, and future. And so God understands that, but God can also understand something beyond that. God can understand all of that happening simultaneously. God can perceive a past, present, and future happening simultaneously.
So, okay, that makes sense. If that's the case though, but then God can still hear our prayers and everything?
Sure. Yeah.
I guess he's like omnipotent, but.
Yeah, and again, this is why this is really traditional Jewish theology in some ways. It's sort of a radical overlay, but the traditional roots are still there. That yes, God is omnipotent. God is all powerful. God is all knowing. God is all good. Although one could say, well, wait, if God is all good, then how could evil exist within God? That's a harder one to explain. I don't have a good answer for that. If evil originates in God, to call God all good, that's a tougher one. I think that's maybe a logical impossibility. But I will say this, and here's where I'm with Harold Kushner. If I have to give up one of those all things, all knowing, all powerful, all good, I'm willing to give up the all powerful for the all good. I think all good's better than all powerful. But yeah, I mean, there's a mystery here. We're discussing a mystery. What the Kabbalists are trying to do is describe a mystery, that God, the Ein Sof, is ultimately a mystery. God is transcendent. God is above us. There are things about this we will not comprehend because we are finite creatures. But we can still try to talk about it and still try to understand it and make sense of it. Yeah.
I
I
once
want to
was
say something.
Yeah, Leah, please. Thank you, Allison. Yeah, Leah.
If if we can assume, I mean, you come from a point of view that God exists everywhere, but if you don't believe that God exists, then how the world continue? Everything is moving, it's not standing, it's not like in one position. So I think there is a duality in seeing it, in seeing the existence of God, or question it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I do think we think in dualities. I do think that's the way that our mind works, right? When we're talking about up, down, left, right, past, present, even we'll make that a triple thing. But yeah, I mean, there's sort of still a level of duality as
Rabbi?
well as unity. It's a paradox. I think what mystical traditions present to us is a paradox. How can two things that seem contradictory still coexist and complement each other? So I think mystics are very comfortable with paradox and mystery and not all making perfect sense. It's not to say that reason and intellect and rationality aren't important. They are. But sometimes things do transcend the rational and the logical. And that's where paradox comes in, Yeah, Harvey?
So let me read something to you in
Yeah, please.
this book for Kabbalah for Dummies.
Oh, you have a Kabbalah for dummies? You also had Kabbalah for beginners. You got beginners and dummies?
Yeah, you got to start somewhere, right?
I
Anyway,
love it.
The
Those
prayer-
dummy series are great, and they're not for dummies, by the way, but they're great. They're great books. So yeah, please, Harley.
yeah, the prayer that a person says, it's itself God. It is
Yeah.
not like when you talk to a friend.
Yeah.
Your friend and your words are two different things. It is not so far prayer. For prayer, you who are praying and God are all one. So it makes it easier to when you pray, he's not omniscient. He's inside you. And so anyway, that was interesting to me. I like that.
Well, that is interesting. And that's sort of, and also if you look at the Four Worlds piece by the Jewish Renewal movement, they sort of talk about that too under Atzilut, that highest level, that spiritual level. It is not we who pray, well, I don't know if you're saying this, Harley. It is not we who pray, rather God prays in us. With God's own eyes, we see ourselves. Ooh, now we're getting really deep. With God's own eyes, we see ourselves. It is not we who pray, rather God prays in us. Is that different than what you were saying, Harley, or is it similar?
No, I think that's a good, that's another interpretation, but I think it's very close to what I just said.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes it easier for me to think about prayer because I've never really believed in an omniscient being that's watching over me, but this way I feel God is with me when we do prayer, because I pray, because he is within that prayer. He is there. So
God
it
is within the
says,
prayer.
yeah. So it says that
Yeah.
that God and you are one when you're saying a prayer, whether it is God who is praying or I am praying, it's all one.
Yes. Yeah, Harley. And I think this sense of divine imminence, I think, is so powerful for folks who, really can't conceive of this outside, separate, other being. I mean, when we really think about it, what do we know about beyond the physical, right? I mean, every experience we have has a physical component to it. How can we even imagine the non-physical existing? It's back to the old question that a child will ask, well, if God created everything, who created God? I don't think there's a really good answer to that. We could say, well, God created God's self, but how? What mechanism did God use? How did God will God's self into existence? You know, I think, again, we're now getting at the level of mystery that either is illogical or it is beyond us. And I think Harley, Art Green would agree with you. He never really could connect to the idea of God as being separate, other, having a separate personality, a separate mind, a separate being, different than what was in this world. And so for those who are a little bit more naturalistic in your thinking, that everything has to have a natural basis to it, this idea of divine imminence and God being part of this divine imminence is, I think, very attractive. It's very attractive. Now, some people might say, well, why do you call that God? And Rabbi Harold Schulweis would say, well, why can't we call that God? There is no monopoly on a God concept. There is nothing in Judaism that ever said you must believe that God is separate and other and completely spiritual and transcendent. And that's certainly some of the Talmudic view. It's maybe some of the biblical view, but there have always been other God concepts in Judaism, and they're kosher. And so Rabbi Harold Schulweis would say, you don't have monopoly on a way to think about God. That's not Judaism. So let's come up with ways that we can think about God, which the Kabbalists did, that did resonate. As we were talking about at the beginning, there was something that resonated here with people at that time. Maybe it's back to the concept of evil. You know, they were experiencing tragedy and expulsion and the Inquisition. And wait, how do you square this with this, God outside of us and this guy? How do you square this? So there's more to it than that. But I do think there are ways to make this apply to how we might think about the world. How do we understand reality, and draw some ideas that, I mean, I think we talked about this last time, and if we didn't, it's worth talking about just again for a little bit. I mean, wouldn't physicists tell us? I think we talked about this. Everything in the universe, atoms and molecules, those building blocks, there is a connection with everything else. And, what even some scientists say, we're stardust. We in our bodies, there is the original Big Bang and the sun and the chemicals that make up the sun. It's in our bodies. We are stardust. Just come together in a different form, a different manifestation. I think on some level, Kabbalah is saying the same thing. We are all connected to everything else. And there's this underlying structure to reality. And they would add, God is part of that, not separate, part of it. Yeah, other thoughts, other things that we talked about tonight that might resonate with you or you find helpful. Yeah, Philip.
I'm sure I've mentioned this before, and of course, for me, it's always going to come back to a movie reference. But when we're talking about this sort of duality, I think to The King and I, when the King of Siam is reading the Bible and he says to Anna, Moses was a fool. There's no way that the world could have been created in 7 days. And her response is, the Bible wasn't written by men of science, it's written by men of faith. And it's the same miracle, whether it took 7 days or millions of years. I think it's, sort of some duality or intersection of science and faith.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there is that.
That Yul Brynner was smart, huh, Phil?
He won an Oscar, so he had to be, right?
Yeah, he must have been great.
Well, thank you, Philip. Jerry and Cindy, yes, please.
We keep looking for God external. Perhaps God is internal. Perhaps we are God. And
Yeah.
we, through creation, create life, and we create material things. And perhaps that is why Jewish minds have been so productive in winning all these wars for innovation. God may be in us, and we keep looking for outside. Maybe things.
Yeah, the God within, the divinity within, the godliness that we possess. And, the Kabbalists and what Moses Cordovero is saying, I mean, certainly, in this concept, so God and the world are the macrocosm of the spherode, and we are the microcosm. We're the God in miniature, and these attributes are within us. These qualities of godliness are within us. But I think somebody like Moses Cordovero, I mean, a true Pan-Antheist, would probably say, don't make the separation and put ourselves, I'm trying to tread carefully here because I don't want to put words in their mouths because I can't speak for him. He lived 500 years ago. I think there are implications for these ideas with how we treat the world, and not just other people, but I mean the environment, how we treat animals, how we treat plants, how we treat the ocean, how we treat the sky. I think there are tremendous implications in these ideas to see divinity in every physical thing on this planet and within the planet and in the sky and in the atmosphere, to see divinity in that. If we really take that seriously, Maggie, tell Jan, I think we're going to treat this world in a very different way. If
Yeah,
we
too
really
bad
take it
that's
seriously.
not how it is. Too bad that we don't think that way.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're going to be leaving for our kids and our grandkids.
Would there be in Israel if there was not an adverse Holocaust? There would never have been an Israel.
Well, and maybe there's a way of well, yeah, I mean, I agree, Jerry, and certainly, as we know, there is cause and effect, and things are connected, as we were saying, and sometimes tragedy and renewal and rebirth are connected. Yeah. All right, you all. Let's see. I want to make sure too. I see some things in the chat box. Allison said that kind of ties back to what we were speaking about earlier. Took God a week to create Earth, but God doesn't experience time like us, so it's like a metaphor. He's everywhere and every time simultaneously. Yeah. So there's some really deep thoughts about reality and about the creation of the world. And as Randy is saying, yeah, in Genesis, didn't human beings get mastery of all the rest of living beings? Yes, that is something I think we're still trying to come to terms with. And again, from a Kabbalistic standpoint, and to Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. How are we using our responsibility as God in miniature, as these powerful, we're certainly the most dominant species on the planet. How are we using our power? Are we in balance? Are we in harmony with each other, with the world, with God, or are we out of balance? And so I think, again, it's that idea of trying to get back into balance, trying to back into harmony, and we can definitely abuse our power. So yeah. Well, all right. Thank you all. I hope this has been enriching. I hope it's been understandable. I hope that what we talked about is at least understandable. We may not agree or disagree with it, but hopefully understandable. And I hope some of it is applicable to our lives. We're really going to focus on more applicable aspects during our next class, which is not next Wednesday, but we're taking next Wednesday off. We will rejoin. We will we'll be with each other again the last Wednesday in February, which is February 23rd, 2 weeks from tonight, 7:30 to 9, we will start applying this to prayer, to meditation, to tikkun olam, to behavior, to ethics, and we'll try to bring it back down to Malchut and Shekhinah and to this world, and how to really apply this in our spiritual Jewish lives. Thanks to Jill Namiro and the Adult Education Committee for sponsoring this. I wanted to let you know too, oh, Professor Penny, thank you all. If you're interested in Lunch and Learn tomorrow, again, sponsored by Adult Ed, it's on Zoom from 12 to 1 o'clock tomorrow. You may have heard, speaking of the Holocaust, Jerry, on The View, it was mentioned that the Holocaust wasn't racism. And I think it's worth exploring that comment and exploring it in all its complexity. If you heard that story, if not, we'll talk about it. But so we'll talk about that statement that was made recently on The View that the Holocaust was not racial.
Yeah,
And
ignorance.
well, we'll talk about it. I got to tell you, just wanted to let you know, on some levels, it's true. So again, if we're going to look at different levels, on some level, that's true, but not on all levels. So, but join us and please bring your ideas and your thoughts about it tomorrow for Lunch and Learn, 12 to 1 o'clock. You can find the Zoom link Jason sent to you, I think on Sunday. Then on this, speaking of Sunday, this upcoming Sunday, the 13th, we're going to journey through the Bible. We're going to look at King Solomon's prayer as he dedicated the first temple in Jerusalem. Let's see, for those of you who are joining us, who have been studying this and join us this Sunday, can we find some Spherotic attributes in Solomon's prayer? Can we find any Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism in Solomon's famous prayer of many verses? So we'll see if we can add that to it and talk about it on that level and other levels. So a lot of adult ed going on. Please check also Jill Namiro and the Adult Education Committee, always doing great programs. Ruth has got her Wise Saging program, book club. We've got so many things. So I think that is everything.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, we got it.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thanks, everyone.
you.
Bye.
You're welcome.
Bye.